I was like, I have to make this accurate and painful. And so it's funny because because I was like, whatever, nobody's going to want to play this. And then, it made $400. And I was like, okay, people want to play it. People still want to play golf. Okay, cool. So that was weird. It was really funny because the feedback I got was from people was like, this is perfectly accurate to the amateur experience. Like, this is first time out going on the course, like dead on.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Jennings, and today I'm joined by Damien Crawford. Damien is the head of operations and solo developer behind Cannibal Interactive and the creator of several games, including I Have Low Stats, but My Class is Leader. My older sister left the computer, so I got on and found myself trying to coordinate a raid in a game, and I don't play MMOs. Yes, that is actually the game's name. And their most recent release, Damien Crawford's Golf Experience 2022. Today, we'll be talking to Damien about how they've survived for nearly a decade as a dedicated indie game developer, the difference between developing tabletop games versus video games, the benefits and values in creating game jams, and much more. A big thank you to Prismatic Studios for being our Season 6 sponsor. More on them later. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Zero to Play Podcast. Welcome to the show, Damien. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just right off the bat, got to start with a compliment. You're one of my favorite indie developers to follow. Your work is so diverse, right? You explore so many neat mechanics. I love all the themes you kind of seem to play with. I think when Screenshot Saturdays happen, some of your posts are my favorites to kind of track. It just always seems like you're having a really fun time making stuff, and it's fun watching you make stuff because it looks like you're having a good time doing it. So I'm a fan of yours for sure. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm also amused by that kind of statement, just because usually for Screenshot Saturdays, I'm like, I don't have any new art to put up, so I'm just going to put like screenshots of my design documents or whatever spreadsheet I'm in, just because it's like, well, this is what I've been doing this past week. I've been working on 780 equipment pieces, right. So enjoy looking at that.
Progress is progress, right? And so with that said, right, you work on so many cool and unique projects. And strangely enough, the one kind of common theme I kind of saw, like while researching your games, reading some of the reviews and stuff, is kind of what I'll affectionately describe as kind of like a grating or uncomfortable quality. I think in one of your reviews, you kind of refer to not necessarily like enjoying giving your players the answer, kind of making them work for it a little bit. And so I'd love to like hear more about that. Like, what's your philosophy behind that? Like, and like, is that something you enjoy? Like, do you intentionally, is that a part of the games you like to create?
Yeah. So I don't like spending time just sanding down the edges of games. Because I mean, there's specific things that I aim for when I'm trying to make a game. And that's what I care about when I'm making it above all else. Like, if anything gets in it that way, then it's unnecessary to me and I just don't care. So I'll just like, it's important for me to be as sincere as possible with my projects. And so I don't want to, there's games that I've seen where it's like they were really interesting, but then they kind of just ran away from what they were trying to go for. Like at the last minute, they were like, you know what, let's actually just have a different message attached to this. And it's like, no, there's no sense in being afraid with what I'm making. So there's no sense. Like, I'm trying to think. I think it was Tyreek Plummer, the person that's working on Catacomb Kids. And he was talking about, working on it and trying to get accustomed to the fact, like, how do people deal with how other people view or review or perceive your games? And just like a general Twitter question. And I was just like, if the way people feel about my games as soon as it leaves my hands is no longer my problem. Because they're going to feel however they want to feel about it. And I'll absolutely do, bug fixes, and I'll take actual critique. But oftentimes I'm like, no, it's not my problem anymore. Like it is my child that is now a part of the wilderness, and it will devour on its own, and it will be just fine. Like, so I think if people find them challenging to love, then that's just the nature of my love with my games.
For sure. Interesting. That's interesting. And that is, I guess that's a unique response to me in the sense that, a lot of us can kind of obsess over the way people perceive our games, right? And I know I've definitely struggled with, attaching my own personal values with how people perceive my games, which when you release something great, right? When you release something that's not beloved, it can really put you in a hole. And so I guess, have you always been like that? Have you always kind of felt like, I create and I just let it go? Or did you have to kind of grow into that mindset?
I had to do some growing into that. I remember when I released my first commercial project, Legend of Moros, and that was back in the days of Steam Greenlight. Boy, howdy, is it interesting to deal with people on Steam and their opinions of your games. Especially on those days where there weren't as many games getting onto the platform like there is now.
Right.
And so, it was easier for people to keep up to date. And so, gosh, there's some people who just have nothing better to do than trash whatever gets onto the platform. So that was rough. But then from that, I was just like, well, okay, you know what? If that's just your opinion, like and some of it, okay, it's good feedback, but a lot of it, it's like, there's absolutely nothing I can do with this. Right. So I'm not going to waste my thoughts on dealing with it. Right. So that's just something I've had to get used to. I would say it's possible to be overly that way, where you're just not taking feedback at all. Right. And so there is some balance you have to strike with that. But it really comes from, is a person operating in good faith? And if so, it's like, okay, let's try and actually have a discussion about this. Right. But a lot of times it's not, and I'm not going to waste my time on it. I've got I have a short development cycle. And the amount of time I can spend worrying about what this person said, I can make a whole nother game. Right. So.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And I mean, I guess that speaking of your development cycles, I think I read that some of your prototypes take anywhere from a week to make or I think you've made a full game in a week up to maybe a month of making a prototype. And so I believe Legend of Moros, I think I read that took over 2 years. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, right? Going from your first big game taking 2 years to kind of, it sounds like you're more comfortable in making shorter game experiences now. I guess kind of what did you learn from trying to make it a longer experience versus the space you're in now where it feels good to make shorter games? I'm assuming. I might be wrong, but
yeah. I mean, the big thing is that time is literally money. The amount of time that I spend on development is how much cost is sunk into things. And I'm very fortunate in that I'm very used to living on the cheap. So I'll make do with whatever I have to keep my costs down. And that's basically how I have to operate. It's not about how much money is this thing going to make, but how much can I spend to survive making this thing that probably won't get much return on investment. Right. Partly because of the nature of the fact that I operate in a very specific niche with my games, and partly because I don't have the marketing budget. I can't get the staggering amount of visibility that a lot of other games would get. My games, no one would describe them as, artistically beautiful, people like the designs, people might like the writing, people might like the concept, but, looking in terms of graphics, no, I'm not competing,
Right.
and that's just not something I'm interested in doing. So you have to get creative. And the way that I do that is we shorten down our time. We figure out how can we make things faster, but still good.
Right.
Also, as a one-person operation, I'm able to reprioritize on the fly. Like I can work on writing one day, and then I go, okay, you know what? We need to focus on getting the tutorial up and running to make sure that there's something to play test. Also, assets help because that literally saves money. So because that saves time.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, what can I get that I can adjust to my own uses, because I don't just like copy pasting.
Right.
But also this would at least work with getting a prototype off the ground. And then if that gets traction, we can see about redoing the assets and making it something full.
Right.
Also, because I have such a backlog of projects now, I have a big array of asset repositories and, code piles to pull from. So it's like, okay, I've done this before, so I can just pull that out and adjust it.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So definitely it sounds like reusability is a huge part of kind of your general work pipeline. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. It's what can I recycle? And then also, what should I absolutely craft out of what we need to do now?
Right.
Because that's something that I can reuse later. So yeah, I'm not afraid to work on things and get, new things off the ground. But at the same time, it's like, well, it's very helpful to have stuff to fall back on, that so I can just push stuff out and have a full game out in a week,
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess I think a common indie game developer problem, I think we all understand, is like trying to function on intense limitations, right? Like, you don't have the budget, like you said. Sometimes you might want a scene to work a certain way. It just is going to cost too much in terms of time, in terms of, performance, in terms of assets. Like, there's just so many limitations you have to work under. And I guess, speaking as someone who seems to be a little bit more comfortable at figuring out what matters most and what can kind of be reused and how to like really simplify those costs. Do you have like any kind of rule of thumbs that you kind of use when kind of thinking about how to create something with as little investment as possible in that way?
With as little investment as possible. I mean, it's tough because it's hard to codify like what my rule of thumbs are, because I work by myself, which means that a lot of it has gone from being an actual process to just intuitive. Like,
Right.
Oh, I'm just doing this now. Why am I doing this? Well, I know I have to get it done. Like, it's that sort of almost muscle memory, like a reflex.
Right.
So it's a little tough to say, but I mean, that's, one of the reasons I'll release prototypes on itch.io, or, I've put out stuff and just been like, let's just see what happens. I've run game jams where, the main reason I was doing it was just like, I wanted a reason to make something, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to make, but I knew like a guideline of what I wanted to do. And so I just kind of put up a game jam idea, and then people actually paid attention. And I was like, well, I'm in it now. Like, I have to make something that is in regard to this. So
Right.
that sort of helps push me to get something done.
Okay, that makes sense. I dig that. Yeah, and I think I love to tinker with stuff too, so I totally understand. Right, having an excuse to make something new is always great, in my book. So I totally get it. Wow, that's really cool. And so, man, there's a couple ways I'd love to go. I'd love to pick your brain about game jams, but I guess I'm really curious, like, where did your kind of game development journey start? Because I think, you mentioned like uploading games to itch. I looked at your catalog. I think I saw a few like like RPG character templates. I saw different kind of like adventure guides and stuff you'd written. And so it sounds like your love for gaming extends far beyond even video games. So I guess I'd love to know like where your love for gaming started and, how did you get to the point of making games?
So where I originally got started with just playing RPGs, it was like my 8th birthday, Christmas, somewhere around there. Because my mom had gotten like a Nintendo and a Super Nintendo and played Mario and Donkey Kong and those sorts of things. And I remember it was really funny because she would play, because I did not have the reflexes to play those games. So she would play Donkey Kong, but I would tell her like what she was doing wrong because it'd be like one of the minecart levels. And I'm like, no, you have to jump here. Like it's the third one. And you actually don't do the jump in order to get onto because you have to get the whole Kong. Like, yeah, it was like looking back, it's ridiculous. But at the same time, it's like, I kind of am sitting here like, how could she not notice that? Yeah, so there was one year where I finally got games of my own. So I got for whichever holiday it was, one of those see-through atomic purple Game Boy Colors. And I got Pokemon Blue and Dragon Warrior 3. And that pretty well cemented me getting into RPGs. I eventually got the, like the Prima strategy guide for Dragon Warrior 3. And that also was like, I remember spending a lot of time like looking through enemy stat blocks and equipment and understanding like what's better versus what isn't. So that sort of led into me being the way I am. But in terms of actually making games, I worked I worked at a fast food place for 3.5 years, and then I finally got a job with the state. So suddenly I had a lot more disposable income. And so I was like, oh, well, I've wanted to mess around with making games before. So I got like RPG Maker VX Ace, and I started fooling around in that. And then a lot of bad things happened in my life at once.
Oh, boy.
And I was like, well, if the safe road doesn't pan out, then why not just do what I want to do? And so I went full time on the game.
Wow.
And so that kind of just led into there. I've kind of just, that happened, and then I haven't stopped. So I'm still here to everyone's dismay and terror.
Oh, I love it. Wow, very cool. Wow. And so, I guess, could you like walk us through like what it was like to make your very first game? Like, what was that experience like?
Oh man. So my very first game was actually Legend of Moros. That is the first one I started, and I sat there and I finished it. And I did take a break for a little bit to work on a game jam, because there was like an official RPG Maker game jam, and so I was like, okay, yeah, let's get in on that. And so I was like, oh, a month, that's plenty of time. And so I like start one day, and then I'm back to work on the main game. And then I realized, oh, there's only like 48 hours left in the game jam. So I crashed at a friend's house, and I'm just like, for about 40 hours straight, just working on stuff. It's so bad. So that's Evil's Apprentice. And that is, it's not good. it's so there's a couple interesting things I tried to do with it, and the experience was some benefit because it did teach me a lot about it did help me figure out how to fix some bugs I was coming up with in my main project. And so I was like, okay, you know what, this was a net gain, like I'm fine with this. Right. But that was also interesting because somebody for that game jam was reviewing games, Like, they were just like, oh, well, I didn't finish my game, but I want to, like, check out the others, so why not try my hand at game reviewing? And so they actually reviewed that game. And it was funny because they were like, well, it's not entirely bad. And I was just like, I'll take that. Like, great. Like, it was actually like an interesting review, and like it had a lot of fair points to it, but it was just really funny because I remember that was like the main takeaway. It was like 3 out of 5. It was like, it has some things to it. I can't recommend it, but I was like, okay. And so Legend of Moros took 2.5 years, and that was me trying to make a 40-hour RPG, like, you know, very classic.
Right.
And I got it up to about 30 hours, and I thought it would take like just 1 year, and then it was like, oh, this is going to take another year. And then that year ended, and I was like, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this.
Man.
Like, living situation wasn't great, and so I was like, okay. And so like May came around, and I was like, okay, by the end of this month, this is getting done, and whatever state it's in is whatever state it's in, because I can't keep doing this. And so I finished the game, and I released it. First released it on itch.io because it was still in Steam Greenlight hell. And it made $40 on release day, which is not good for a project you spend 2.5 years on. Which that was a fun day because like I stayed up almost the entire night. I slept from about 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. Then I finished the last few things that I knew were issues. And then I did like a quick cheating run through with DevTools to just be like, does this function? Can I get from start of game to end of game? Right. Yes? Okay. And then so I finished that at like 7 in the morning. I uploaded it. It takes a while. It's now 7:30. And then I got in my friend's car at 8 to officiate their wedding. Wow. So that was a rough day for me. Everybody's like, oh, how are you doing? I'm like, oh, I just released my first game. And they're like, oh, how do you feel? I'm like, I don't know yet. I'm entirely delirious from getting 3 hours sleep, spending 2.5 years on this project where I don't know how it's going to do. And now I have a void that's staring at me in front of my life because this was such a big part of it. And now I don't know what I'm going to do with myself ever again. Ever again. And so they caught the hint that I wasn't doing great, but I was going to do the best that I could. So, and that's funny because it was like right before an anime convention too, which I'd already like agreed to go to and stuff. So it was just like that. The whole following week was just pure delirium.
Wow.
Like, but yeah, the game didn't do well. So that was rough.
Right.
But I kept making games, and so I'm still here, which is the wild thing. That's one of the big takeaways. If anybody is listening to this that has yet to finish their first game, the real trick is to survive your first game. Like if you can get that out and you can deal with it not selling well and you can make another, you're already so far ahead of the curve. Like I remember my first GDC I went to, it was GDC of 2016. My game had gotten through Steam Greenlight a week before. So it had taken like almost a full year for my game to get through Steam Greenlight, but it finally did. And so it was funny going to a networking dinner on day 0, which was funny because like I just happened to know a person that managed to get me in there for free because it was like I had $40. I was like, I'm not living in San Francisco very well on $40. Like there's an underpass I'm going to sleep under, and there's a couple places I can go get cheap food, and that's basically how I'm having to do this.
Right.
But I ended up with like a free pass and other stuff. I was like, I'll take this. This will work. Which the whole event itself is another story, but it's funny going to that networking dinner that night and people basically being like, oh yeah, well, you know, I just finished getting my bachelor's and I'm hoping to be a concept artist, or, oh, I just finished getting my master's and I'm looking to do this. Right. And then there's me at this networking table of like 12 people being the only person going, yeah, so I have no education, but my first game just got onto Steam. And so it's very weird being at like both simultaneously the top and bottom of the totem pole because I don't have any education.
Right.
But I've also finished so many more games than a lot of people that have had at least some level of success or acclaim. Right. I mean, now I have a game where I made it in a week and it got in PC Gamer and it made $4,000 in a day. Like, it's weird. It's just about surviving and figuring out what you're going to do with your life after that point. And then you just really lean into that. Everyone else's mileage may vary. I can't say it's a good way to live, but it is a way to live, and that's something.
This episode of the Zero to Play podcast is brought to you by Prismatic Studios. Prismatic Studios is an Unreal Engine technical consultancy based in Auckland, New Zealand, focusing on development services for clients that need support prototyping, implementing and testing features, or adding development resources to existing projects. With their expertise using Unreal Engine, they can help consult and work alongside your teams to avoid common pitfalls that are so common in software and game development these days. Reach out to them today for a quote or free consultation. A link to their website can be found in the description below. Back to the show.
I think, of the many skills that you need to be a successful game dev, probably the most universal is being able to persevere, right? Like, you're going to have to figure out how to survive some kind of conflict, some kind of chaos, some kind of disorganization, and just figuring out a way to power through, right?
I mean, that goes hand in hand with development, because like no design document survives contact with the enemy. And neither does your lifestyle after a game does not do well. So
man, that's awesome. Wow. So it's really good to hear. And I guess in like contrast, I guess, thinking of like where you were back then to where you are now, I guess, how do you feel being where you are now that like you have released so many games? Like I said, you're one of my favorite indie developers to follow, and I think you're a pretty big staple to the indie game dev community. And like, how does that feel to be where you are now versus back then?
I don't feel like I'm that big of staple of the indie community, but also it's odd. It's a weird position that I've been grappling with for a while now, because especially like these past 2 years where I just don't go outside. I've had to grapple with the fact that like, oh, people know who I am and are aware of my existence outside of my immediate bubble, and I have no control of that, and I will never have control of that. And that is terrifying. Like, I am a very introverted person, and I have fans, and that, like, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying I don't appreciate that, but I am saying it is weird to grapple with. like I'm appreciative of it. Definitely have gotten like some financial help when I've needed it from people seemingly randomly, like, oh, I like your game, so here's $300, and I'm like, wow, that's a lot of money to just drop on Guilty Pleasure, my tabletop game where instead of rolling dice you file paperwork. Like, that was a wild thing out of the blue. It was out of the blue. Like, I go onto like my itch profile, I'm like, oh hey, I got a notification. I'm like, okay, that has to be a mistake. Like, they have to like have hit the wrong thing on PayPal where it added 2 digits because it's a $3 game and it's $300. Like, so, like, I have to go pull up their payment info and send an email, and they're like, oh, no, I just like what you do, want to support it. And it's like, wow. So this is my life now. Okay, that's cool and very appreciative. Want to be clear. Just I don't get that support from my family. Like, like I remember, because I've been doing this almost 9.5 years now. I remember at about the 8-year mark where I was visiting family briefly for, a little bit before Thanksgiving because, COVID going on. And
Right.
I absolutely refused to do something on Thanksgiving because there was no way we were going to have like minimal human contact, but they kind of were like, well, we already bought a plane ticket for you, but it's at least beforehand. So I'm like guilted into it like, fuck. But yeah, I remember sitting in the airport. We were going to be heading home, and my stepdad, 8 years in, asking me when I'm going to stop doing this and get a real job.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, yeah. That was really a point that hit home for me. Like, my family still doesn't approve of what I'm doing now that I've been doing this many times longer than I've done anything else in my life.
Right.
And that shows that they will never approve of what I'm trying to do unless it's like if I became a millionaire, they would care.
Right.
But that's like,
Right.
well, they care about money. They care like that's actually the only indicator of success I think they care about. And so I'm like, okay, then I can't care.
Right.
So they ask like, oh, what have you been up to? I just tell them, business as usual, same old, same old. Like sometimes I'll tell them if it's really good news, but it's really more to like put my feelers out and see like, okay, so are you guys trying to be nice because you're close to retirement and you're worried about how long that money's going to last? Because I know that's a concern for you.
Right.
So yeah, I'm not happy that that's my relationship with my family, but if, someone's listening to this and they notice how so many other people have support from their family and they don't get that, it's a tough road to walk. It is doable, but gosh, like I'm, very grateful to my friends that have helped me out and, to the fans that have helped me out and to the other people in the industry who have, been like, oh, you make cool stuff. Like, let me get you a free ticket into this or, that sort of thing. Or especially like, what I have going on now with Strange Scaffold for Purgatory Dungeoneer. Yeah. Like really helpful to finally get a game published by somebody that's not me self-publishing. Yeah. So it's been a very long road to go down to get to this point.
Right.
But very happy for it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Wow.
I forget what the original question was at this point. Like I feel like I just kind of went into a fugue state for like 10 minutes and just had shit to say. So
there's nothing wrong with that. Oh man. I totally understand. I mean, yeah, I think I don't know if it's the same for developers coming up now, but I went to college to study game programming and all that stuff, and graduated with my degree. And I think at the 6-month mark, I hadn't gotten my first game job, and my mom was starting to get a little more intense. Like she was always supportive, but once we got to like 4, 5, 6 months, I was like, yeah, so I work at a hospital. I can get you a job, so whatever this thing you're doing can stop, and you can actually make real money. And so, So yeah, no, I appreciate you speaking to that, and I'm sure we're not the only two who like know what it's like to to passionately want to be a part of the industry and want to create, and not necessarily to get the the people you love most, maybe not to back you up the way you'd like, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like on one hand, I do get it to a point because those are the people that have known you the longest, right? And so if they're not the closest people to you, they're at least, somewhat close in that way.
Right.
And so they're going to be some of the first people that are going to tell you to stop, that are going to reject this high risk notion that you have.
Right.
And that's one of the big first hurdles that you have to push past sometimes.
Right.
On the other hand, if you're going at something for so long and they're still hitting you with that, you have to think like, okay, is this a big issue with yourself, or is this an issue with them?
Right.
So that's something that you have to kind of cross that bridge and deal with it. But it's now that I'm not even now that I've noticed as I don't care about what their opinion is of me anymore, I've gotten a little bit faster at things. You know, like it's helped free up that little bit of care that laid in the back of my mind. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a net good, but I am saying it's at least like helped me in that way, and it's at least something I know of and can confront.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I really appreciate how, like, you sound very assured of yourself, and like you sound really confident. And so, you know, like I said, I've followed you on Twitter for quite a while, right, and seen your games. And I think one of the more interesting things recently was seeing your golf experience. And I think you released that as like an April Fool's joke, right? And and then it was almost like you were surprised because people maybe played it with and appreciate it beyond being an April Fool's joke. So I'd love to hear about like what were you expecting when you released your Damien Crawford 2022 golf experience, and then and then what was the response, and how was that surprising?
So first I have to say I don't consider myself a confident person, but I do consider myself a sincere person. And I think that's really what comes through, because I have hangups about my stuff all the time. Like I have trouble, I legitimately have trouble play testing my games, largely in part because it's like this weird form of secondhand embarrassment almost. Like, oh, past me made this. Like, wow. It is very hard for me to confront. And that's honestly like, once I get over that, it's over for everybody else, because then I'm going to be totally free. But that's a massive hang up for me. It is very hard for me to play test my stuff. And that's not a good trait to have. You should be very easily able to play test your own projects. You should think that they're at least kind of good, but it's a big challenge for me. Like, okay, Damien Crawford's Golf Experience 2022, I played enough of it to make sure that everything worked. And then I just kind of looked. I have not played through Damien Crawford's Golf Experience 2022. I did not sit there and play all 18 holes. And there might be one or two people who I know, especially one who streamed the game. Sorry, Thomas, like you've played through more of the game than I have. So very, very weird hang up that I have about that. And I acknowledge that. But yeah, golf game. So first I made so the golf game is this year, 2022. Back in 2021 for April Fools, I was like, oh, let's do a game jam because there's all this artificial scarcity nonsense going around. Partly because of like just, you know, tech bro nonsense. And then also, you know, the limited releases that Nintendo was doing for things like their mini consoles and the 3D Mario games. I was like, that's nonsense. Like it costs you nothing to keep those games out, but you're doing this artificial scarcity to make people buy. And so I was like, let's get in on it as indies. So I was like, we'll make a game in a week. Everybody puts their game up for sale, no free games, but actually like for money for one day, 24 hours. And then we all take them down. And so I did this, and that's when I created. My older sister left the computer, so I got on and had to coordinate a raid in a game, and I didn't play MMOs. Which it's a raid boss simulator, effectively. You get thrown into it, you don't know what you're doing. And then PC Gamer did an article about it, which I'm pretty sure they caught notice of it because Rami Ismail tweeted the game with a glowing endorsement about how, you know, it's exactly what it says on the tin, and it's worth the entry fee. So, you know, which it's funny, like industry professionals playing my games and like knowing who I am, and I'll talk about my game, and then they'll start telling other people, "Oh, you're gonna want to know about this." It's wild. You know, it's weird to feel established in that way. Right. That's one of the few things I have confidence about. But yeah, so I made this April Fool's game, and that one sold well. So this year I was like, well, let's just make another April Fool's game. I was like, what's something nobody's going to want to play? And I was like, that's tough. That's hard to think about. What's something I wouldn't want to play? And I'm like, well, I remember playing golf with my stepdad. And we played golf twice, and it resulted that second one resulted in a broken club and me never being asked to go out golfing again. Oh man, it's just not. Sore losers are bad, but it's bad enough when you're playing with like a sore winner and you're 16 and he won't shut the fuck up. And I was just like, well, here's your 7-iron. Like, oh, I remember just like so mad. Like, you know, the movie Clue where she's like, just flames on my face. Like, yeah, I was heated. And I was like, I need to do something, and I'm holding something, and I need to make sure I don't hit anybody else in the process, but I need to get this out. Like, oh, so mad. Oh, and then he's mad, and I'm like, I'm not apologizing. And then that was the end of that. Oh, man. And so that immediately made me go, golf, that's a good April Fool's game, because let's make it the amateur experience. Let's make this. You have limited club selection because the rest are broken at this point. Like, man. So yeah, I decided, okay, well, how would I even make golf an RPG maker? Because I have to make this awful. Yeah. So yeah, I already knew how to do. I had code for a 3D game in RPG Maker, and so I figured out like, okay, let's set up how I want the clubs to work, and you know how I want the variants of those to be, and how I want terrain to affect them. Because I like playing Mario Golf. Mario Golf, super fun. Enjoy that. Toadstool Tour, even Super Rush, like yes, fantastic, love them. Right. But I was like, I have to make this accurate and painful. And so it's funny because because I was like, whatever, nobody's going to want to play this. And then, you know, it made $400. And I was like, okay, people want to play it. People still want to play golf. Okay, cool. So that was weird. It was really funny because the feedback I got was from people was like, this is perfectly accurate to the amateur experience. Like, this is first time out going on the course, like dead on. And there were people that complained about it, like, oh yeah, I wanted something, I was expecting more weird. And I'm like, you want more weird than golf? Like, this is 4-directional golf. Like, if you want to hit it at a diagonal, you have to hit it once and then hit it again in the other direction. Like, it's not like the ball. If you hit it in the water, enjoy hitting the ball out of the water now. Like, because I don't give you a repeat. We don't have out of bounds here. It's no matter where you go, it is in bounds and it's gonna suck. You hit it into the tree. Well, now it's at the base of the tree. Enjoy hitting it from under the tree now. Like, oh, awful, absolutely awful. I played the first hole and I was like, the putting on this, exactly what I wanted. Miserable. So yeah. And then people played it, and the really fun feedback was somebody was like, this is actually just so much better than the new like PGA 2K21. Like, this, I get into it, I know exactly how everything works. Like, there's no explaining. Like, 5 minutes in, I'm done on my first hole. In that game, like 30 minutes in, I now have a golfer, and I sort of know how the golfing works. Right. So I was like, great. Well, I'm glad it's got a good onboarding process. Right. And then something really funny happened where two of my friends who are like professional marketing people in the games industry were like, let's put together a nonsense trailer of this game. And so they did. Wow. And then I was like, well, now I got to actually like use this. Like, maybe I should just put this on Steam. So I put the golf game on Steam. It has yet to recoup the $100 cost of putting a game onto Steam. So that went about as expected. But on itch.io, it made $400, and so I'm like, okay, that's whatever. You know, it's the cost of a joke, and that's fine.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
So with that gameplay, I'm sure you can understand a little better now why I did not expect people to want that.
Right. Oh man. Does it? Because it sounds like even the concept was kind of born out of your own frustrating golf experience, and so. I guess does it amuse you that other people, when they play it, it probably takes them right back to their terrible golf experiences too?
Yeah. It's the nice thing is that a bad time on a golf course, if you have been on a golf course, is universal. Like that first time is not a good time. You're something is going to happen that's going to suck and make you go, why am I even out here? I've even watched PGA Tour and stuff, and it's wild. Just like there will be times where professionals will hit that one bad shot and then they are tilted for the rest of the day because the one bad thing happened and they can't get over it, just like everybody else.
Right.
So in that way, I think golf is a very human game because it deals with frustration, as opposed to fun. So, yeah.
I love that. Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that was great. Oh, you almost make me want to go to a golf course so I can be terrible and relate better. But also that sounds tremendously frustrating, and I'm probably not going to do that.
Yeah, it's if you're gonna go, make sure it's somebody else's clubs and just go the once.
Oh man, oh that's amazing. Oh man, good times. I guess hearing you kind of talk about the process of creating it and the mindset you approached it with. I read a little bit about your shorter games with worse graphics bundle, and so I'm curious about that. First of all, like where'd that idea come from, and then do you think that there is value in the argument for shorter games with worse graphics? Yeah.
So the reason for putting the bundle together was, it was not long. The first time I did the bundle, it wasn't long after Cyberpunk came out.
Okay.
And there was a large public conversation about, that whole situation, and like all this crunch went into this game and it's borderline unplayable. Like, who cares about how pretty it is if you can't actually play?
Right.
So there were a lot of people talking about that sentiment. And so I was like, maybe I'll see if people put their money where their mouth is. So I started trying to organize the bundle, and then a few people helped out with, putting the word out and actually getting enough developers to submit. And so I was like, okay, yeah, so we got, I think it was 25 people, and we did the bundle at $20 a pop. So it's 25 people's games. It was like 28 or 29 games because you had like a couple people submitted 2 or 3. I think it was 32. Yeah, it was $20, 25 developers, 32 games. And so, yeah, we went with that and didn't get much press. The big issue was itch.io actually on that one, because normally you can click on a tab for bundles or co-op bundles and they'll pop up. We were not popping up on itch.io's site at all. We had 0 internal references.
Wow.
So I only wonder how much better the bundle could have done, because I was expecting $1,000 and the bundle made $8,000. So everybody walked up out of it with like $300-ish bucks.
Nice.
Which was good. It was way more than expected.
Right.
And so, it was interesting because like here in California, that absolutely means like, okay, I get to eat pretty well for this week. Like I can get some groceries and maybe eat out once or twice. Right. We had a couple developers in Brazil who were like, this is minimum wage for a month. It's like, okay, good. I'm glad it was that helpful,
Right.
And that was another thing, is the bundle was really global. It really covered a lot of different people and a lot of different perspectives and a lot of variety in terms of games.
Right.
You know, we had visual novels, we had a bullet hell, we had RPGs, we had tabletop RPGs, you know, all platformers, all sorts of different stuff. And so it was really cool to actually see like just the global diversity along with the game diversity, and to see people actually like respond well to that. And then I ran the second bundle. I think it was around the time that Blizzard was having a bunch of stuff come up, and like partly it was, okay, yeah, there's, you know, developers that would be interested in doing this sort of thing. It would be good to give them positive press, as opposed to seeing all this negative press about some AAA company. But it was a bit awkward just because like I had to do a lot more planning for that one, and now that people knew about it, I had so many more people actually applying.
Right.
So it was tough to like cut it off at a point and be like, I'm sorry, this is how many people are in. So yeah, it was interesting. That one was a lot more successful, but also, which I actually did internal reporting on that one. And when you're nodding, your mic is kind of picking it up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oops. Yeah.
No worries. I'm just like...
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, it was awkward to deal with the whole planning that out and the sort of level of success it got, because that one made almost 20 grand, which again, really cool, but really awkward because there was this sort of, I was getting a bit more backlash from people who were like talking about it almost as if it was like a money grab for indie developers. And it was like, the fuck are you talking about? Like, we already make so little. Like, what? Do you not understand? Like, there was one person who, you know, hit me up on Twitter and was like, oh yeah, because you know, have 3 of your own games on there taking out other people's spots. I'm like, it's not taking out other people's spots. I'm doing that to increase value. Like, it's still 25 developers. Like,
Right.
I'm just adding more games, including my one that's $15, to up the average price of the bundle, because there's a few free games in here. And I want people, because I know a lot of people are going to buy because perceived financial value.
Right.
That's how it is, and it sucks. And I personally think game value is a nightmare to think about, because so many people do underprice their games. Or there's the people that talk about like, oh, I should be able to get an hour of gameplay out of every dollar I spend. And it's like, you're missing so much of the world if you think about every game that way.
Right.
So yeah, I have a lot of annoying thoughts about that, and have dealt with some weird stuff there, to where it's just like, you know, a few people have asked if I'm going to run the bundle again, and currently it's no. Partly because Purgatory Dungeoneer is my core focus,
For sure.
but also because like it's almost not worth the headache. Like, if somebody else wants to run the game bundle, fantastic, do it. You have my full support. I'll let you know whatever it is that you want to know, but it's also a lot of marketing work, and that's not something I enjoy doing.
Right.
And I feel like I'm better served if I just work on projects. So if other people want to run bundles, fantastic, I'll help them out. But it's tough, and it's an awkward space to be in, because then you have to like convince people that games that don't look pretty have value.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Wow. Wow. Yeah, there's so much stuff I could say to follow that up, but I think I'm curious about what you're working on next. I think, honestly, so I'd love to hear about kind of Purgatory Dungeoneer and what it is and what your plans with it are and all that. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so we'll say briefly, there was a micro grant that went around that I applied for and got in. So I've spent a couple of days working on a project for that, which hopefully I'll be able to talk about soon. I think I can technically talk about it, but it's one of those I'm not sure, so I'm not going to too much.
Okay.
But there is, you know, some small thing I did and am involved in. And right now for Purgatory Dungeoneer, that's the big one. That's because it's been a while since I've spent like a year focused on a game, and this is looking to be about that long.
Okay.
So it'll be closer to the end of this year. You know, I still have to get a bit further, and then, you know, we have to have discussions about what exactly the release date's going to be and that sort of business. But it is a game about adventure trauma. You know, it sort of deals with my sort of feelings about, you know, entering the industry and the high risk scenario that took. And then a lot of people that I know who similar conditions. And so it's a lot of my own thoughts about, like, you know, nobody wakes up one day and goes, I'm going to go slay a dragon. It's like, no, your parents kicked you out of the house, or your teacher told you couldn't, or, you know, like you went into the city and somebody was like, I bet you can't do that. Or, you know, the sort of feelings of being told you're not good enough, or, you know, the sort of like queer experiences of not being accepted by your family, or things like that, where it's people have all of these universal experiences that aren't being represented in games. And I feel like a game like this is uniquely positioned to confront some of that and have good stories about that. Because this isn't a game where you're trying to go off and fight the Dark Lord. This is a game where everybody's done adventuring. These are people who that's behind them. They've already taken out the Dark Lord of their past, or they were unsuccessful in the attempt, but they at least have something to share about that. And so that's something that's more worth going into. So that's really at the core of what the game is about. And then there's, in terms of gameplay, where I've had a lot of fun designing a bunch of different classes and figuring out how I'm going to make them actually different from each other. Like, you know, how is a bishop different from a high priest or a cleric? And figuring out, okay, well, one is able to buff their stat at the cost of increasing their mana costs, versus this one that slows themselves down and reduces their evasion, so now they're like a high priority target, versus, you know, just having a character that has a bunch of revives but not very much in terms of direct healing. So it's like, are you just going to wait for your party members to die then and hope you don't do the same? So there's interesting dynamics there, and then how people want to build parties up. So I'm hoping that there's, well, I mean, I know there's going to be enough people who find that to be enough for them. You know, weird, interesting mechanics. Like, I know the Shin Megami Tensei or Wizardry crowd will absolutely be on board with what I'm trying to do here. But I'm hoping that the story also helps pull people in and makes people want to explore all of these characters.
Absolutely. Wow. I love your work, right? Like, I love your work. I appreciate how vulnerable you've been. Just, you know, speaking to some of your challenges, some of the challenges we all face. I love the concept of the game. I love the kind of narrative thread it sounds like you're kind of pursuing. I appreciate you coming by and kind of sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and experience. And so, you know, like I said, I'm a fan. I'm going to continue to follow you. But for people who are new to you and your work, I'd love to know where can they follow you? Where can they follow your work for more updates? Where can we follow Damien and hear and see more of you?
So I'm on Twitter as the worst RPG dev. That is a moniker I had to earn through trial by combat. Yeah, I mean, I post mostly on Twitter. There's my itch.io page, which has all of my games, which is cannibalinteractive.itch.io. Cannibal Interactive is my official business license title for my studio. So you can find that, just those sorts of games on Steam if you look up the developer. Yeah, that's mostly it. Technically, I'm on Instagram as developer Damien. It's rare that I post on there, and it's pretty much just pictures of food because that's the only social media I let my family be on. Yeah, that pretty well covers it. If you play any of my games, try the free ones, and I apologize in advance. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say about that. It's so awkward recommending my games to people because I'm like, I don't know if I can recommend this. Like if you look at screenshots and you're like, I'm about this, then it's probably the game for you. And if you look at the screenshots and you're like, I don't know, it's not. It's just it's going to be more of that. I'm sure people have probably figured out from my discussion here. Like, I'm very much an on the tin kind of person. Like, the game titles often function as pitches, such as I have low stats, but my class is leader, so I recruited everyone. I notified the Dark Lord. Like, that's how all the titles work. That's how my descriptions work. That's how the screenshots are. Like, if you look at it and you go, I'm into that, then you're absolutely going to get more of what you're looking for if you actually play the game. And if you're not into that, look somewhere else. Like, because I don't want you to be unhappy, and it's very much like you can't go into expecting something else because it's not going to be that. So, complete fair warning to everybody.
So you heard it here first. If you don't like the name, then you probably aren't going to like the game.
Yeah, that's a much better way of putting it.
Oh, man. Well, thank you.
As opposed to my development cycles, I am very bad at keeping my actual descriptions that pithy.
Oh, that is hilarious. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Damien. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you and learn more about you, your work, your approach to work, and everything else. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the podcast and joining us today, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. We hope you learned something about game development, the games industry as a whole, or the future of games. Follow us on Twitter at Zero to Play and let us know what you found valuable. Take care and see you in the next episode.